Every once in a while, I like to stray from my usual organic forms, and I like to draw something that's a little more geometric with a lot more straight lines. So I would love it if you joined me in creating this design. It's actually not as difficult as it looks. So how about we get started? So for this design, I'm just using some of this dot paper. It's basically just graph paper, so whatever you have is fine. There are other ways to do this that don't require the graph paper, but just for ease, I'm going to use that. I'm just going to use a pencil. I also want to use an eraser, and just really quickly, this pencil that I have here that has kind of a pencil on one side and this thing on the other side, that thing on the other side is just an eraser. Sometimes I like to kind of make my own art tools, and all I did is I took these two pencils, and that pencil on the back is an eraser pencil, and the other one is just one of my usual Ticonderoga pencils. And I just kind of shaved them down and glued them together with some wood glue and added some tape on the top. So if any of you are creative, I would really encourage you to make some of your own tools whenever you need to. So let's see here. When we're going to get started, I just start with a vertical line that is 4 segments long. So there it is. It's 4 segments long. That's the very beginning. And now I'm going to make some that are a little bit angled. So it's heading off from that bottom point. I'm going to head to the side 2 and down 1. So again, to the other side, I'm going to go to the side 2 and down 1. So these two are kind of mirror images of each other. It looks like I've created a corner here. And so now I'm going to use this shape to add a little more dimension. So from the very top, I'm again going to go over 2, down 1 to the right. And now over 2, down 1 to the left. So on the top, it kind of looks like an arrow pointing up. Now from those, I'm going to head down 2 units. And now to the side 2 and down 1, to the side 2 and down 1. So notice that's always the ratio that I'm doing. To the side 2 and down 1 is always. So now I'm going to connect those with those 2 unit lines. And I'm going to go to the left 2, down 1. Notice I'm mirroring that on the other side. Then I'm going to close it off with this little segment here that goes up and then down. So you can see that what I've basically created here is like the little corner of a box. And now we're going to make another one right under it. So we're going to go 2 units down from those 2 points there. And right down the center, we're again going to make that 4 unit length. And then again, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. So these are those longer segments. You'll notice that what I'm recreating is that exact same shape all over again. And those units that I just did there were the longer ones. And so if you want to draw this, I would encourage you to kind of just watch for a little while just to see where each little segment goes. I could sit here and continue to explain up 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, but it kind of gets old. And for those of you who are a little bit more visual in your learning, it might help you more to just watch. And so that very first shape that I created at the very beginning, it's that exact same shape. And all that it is it's stacked one on top of the other. And this is starting to create a little bit of an optical illusion. So that's really what's fun about this one, is that all you're using is your dots and just creating these segments, and they're kind of on top of each other like Legos. And so as soon as you get to the bottom, you're going to start another one, and this is where you create the next row. And this next row will be shaped exactly like the previous one, and it is going to fit in there again exactly like Legos. So notice it's the same shape, the same units, the same measurements, and it fits right in the little cranny that was created by the previous one. So there you see, we just created that last one and it fits right in there. And you'll notice that already you have the beginnings of the space, necessary for the next one. So right in there. And as you start adding more, this is going to start helping you. It's going to make it just a little bit easier to find the placement for the next one. So just pay attention to the angle that you're using. I tend to lose sight of it occasionally just because the dots on this paper are so tiny. I think if I were using graph paper, it would be just a little easier to locate the spots that I need to use. But that's the whole point of doing this kind of thing, is to just be patient, just take your time, and just see how far you can get. So here I'm just adding a few more of those little lines. Try to remember the angle that you are using. You actually could use a slightly different angle for this, and you would get a completely different look. I just chose the kind of the easiest one that I could use that could still accomplish kind of an appealing look. But if you ever feel adventurous, you could always try changing up some of these angles. But of course, the charm to these kind of things is to use the same pattern and just replicate it, because there's something about repeating forms that really appeals to the human mind. And so you'll notice that, unfortunately, I'm kind of going out of the view of the camera for a second here, but what you'll notice is that if you can see the patterns, if you can see how these lines are replicating, you can kind of start making them out of order. So here's what I'm noticing is how some of these angled lines, where they repeat, and I can just start putting them into place without actually creating the entire shape that goes there. So for me, I noticed that there was a little space of about 2 units in between these angled ones, and so I just put them in place. I would encourage you to kind of test yourself out this way if you are very much someone who's into patterns, someone who's into repeating shapes like this. Try to see if you can spot where the shapes repeat. So that's what I was doing for myself here. I just really wanted to keep my mind busy in a different way than I usually do. Usually for me, drawing it is something to keep my mind busy, but I think that occasionally I just really need something to challenge my mind a little more, and something like this definitely does it. And it sure helps that it also creates a really interesting optical illusion. And you can really see that it's starting to build up. It's really building up. It's just so interesting the way all these shapes kind of interlock, and it seems like they shouldn't fit, but they do fit. They absolutely fit, as long as you make sure you stick to the same dimensions. You should be fine. So here I'm just adding some of those shorter segments. And you'll notice that as long as you are careful and patient with yourself, following those same angles, you'll start to see all of these shapes really come together. It's just so satisfying. And while I'm drawing this, I am trying to think about how I would like to color it. One fun thing that you could do with this is, after you're done, and this may take you a while, so if you really want to do this, make sure, again, just take your time. But once I'm done with this, I'm considering either adding different patterns to the different sides. So because I have 3 different sides on each of those shapes to work with, I could possibly add 3 different patterns. So that's one thing that I'm considering. Or I might just add a different color to each side, so that means that I would use 3 colors. So that might be something interesting. If I really wanted to spend some time, I could possibly kind of create a gradient of colors, and that would also add to the illusion. So you can see here I accidentally put my lines in the wrong place, and I just went back and kind of erased them. So this is actually why I decided to do this drawing in pencil, because nobody's perfect, and even I definitely mess up when I do these, and that's fine. It's all part of the process. And even if I were using pen, I could easily just go get some white paint or some whiteout or anything like that, and just kind of go over the section, and just hope that the next time I pay a little more attention and that my lines end up in the right place. So you can see here, I've kind of moved over to the left side of the page and I am just continuing some of those vertical lines. You'll notice that I'm again trying to do that thing where I'm just going by the patterns that I've noticed. I'm not necessarily adding it in one shape at a time, but I went in and added some of those angled lines and then the vertical, and now I'm starting to fill in between. So for me personally, this is actually one of the most fun parts. It's not just watching the satisfying pattern come to life. It's really just that it's good to learn to notice patterns and to not always follow the prescribed method or the recipe in a sense. And so this is really interesting to me, just kind of seeing how that comes to life. Even when I start it in a different line, I start it in a different place, but as long as I'm careful with the measurements, everything should still fall into place. So here I'm just adding those last few nice vertical lines. You'll notice they're always the same length. I started noticing this sort of zigzag that happens in the crease in between the rows, or I guess they're not rows, the columns. In between the columns, there's just this interesting little zigzag that happens between them, and that one was really satisfying. So as I finish this up, I think I've already made up my mind about how I want to do some shading. And because I was already playing around with the pencil this whole time, I'm going to instead use some ink to do a little bit of shading on this one. And this is something that some of you may have seen me do before if you've watched any of my other videos, is I like to use an ink wash sometimes. So I'm going to show you how to do that here. And whenever I use an ink wash, what I use is a refillable watercolor pen. So just like this one, and what I do is I mark on there how many drops of ink I put in there. So in this one I added 24 drops of calligraphy ink, and then the rest of the chamber I just filled up with water, and then I shook it up really nicely. And here what you're seeing is the result of that mix. It's really watered down ink. And the good thing is that once you place it on the paper, nothing's really going to interact with it. Is of course, particularly because the ink that I have is waterproof ink. Looks like I missed a little line here. And so what you notice that I'm doing here is I'm just adding this ink only to one side, the same side of all of them. So I'm just adding a shadow. And this paper that I'm using is not intended for any kind of wet medium, so I'm kind of just seeing how it reacts to the water. This is really just from a kind of a bullet journal that I had a while ago, and I had some of the paper left. So you can see it doesn't really take very well to the water, but once it dries up kind of nicely, and the paper doesn't buckle too much. So I think because of that, I'm going to just use one layer of this. Often when I use the ink wash, I like to add additional layers just to kind of make the shadow look a little more interesting, so it's not just flat. But this time I'm just going to kind of keep it the way it is and not mess with it too much, because I don't want this paper to get much more damaged. So definitely, if any of you are using paper that's not intended for wet mediums, just try it anyway. You might find that your paper can handle it anyway. Usually watercolor is just a lot more, there's a lot more going on when you use watercolor. So I think that's why you may want special paper when you do that. As you can see here, the paper handled it just fine, and already it's adding so much depth to it. So I really like the way this came out. So again, this was just a quick tutorial to kind of help you guys out in case you're in the mood for something that's a little more geometric. And here it is. I'm probably going to add a little bit more to this later, but for now I just wanted to show you how the pattern is done. So I really hope that you enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.